Good morning, everyone. I know more people will join us. Parents tend to trickle in as we get going. So our format is a little bit different today. Rather than just me talking, we actually have some presenters from the Santa Clara County Office of Education they are going to be talking about vaping and all things associated with it. This is something, and Mr. Campbell is here with us also today. This is something that when school is in session, this is actually a really big problem for us. It's interesting, this is something that we have not dealt with at all this year because we haven't had kids on campus. But parents, it's not a problem that has gone away just because we're on distance learning. This is something that still exists, and parents should definitely know about it so that you know what to look for and to watch out for with your kids, because it is a very prevalent problem. As my daughter told me the other day, she's like, Mom, everybody's vaping. So definitely something that you should know about it. So I'm going to turn over the presentation to our presenters and let you guys take it from here. You can share your screen. You can do whatever you need to do. All right. And then parents, definitely feel free to put questions in the chat. And then I'm assuming you guys are okay with them asking out loud too. All right.
All right, thank you, Jenny. So hi everyone, my name is AJ. I am with the Santa Clara County Office of Education, a part of the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program. We'll put that also in the chat box also. The program is also called TUPE. And we're kind of here just we have like a brief presentation with you all, but we do want to have a lot of discussion with you all. And we also have some interactive components where you can use the chat box or also unmute yourself and we can have that conversation, all right? So we can go ahead and get started. I can also have my colleagues introduce themselves also.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. I also work with the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program with the Santa Clara County Office of Ed, and we're super excited to present to you guys today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Juan. Just like my colleagues, I also work with the Tobacco Use Prevention Education Program with the Santa Clara County Office of Education. We're really excited.
All right, Juan, it is all you.
Okay, so let's just get right into it. What is the anatomy of the pod-based system? So click it for me, please. So it's basically broken down into two main components. There's the device with the rechargeable battery and the pods itself, which consists of the housing for the e-liquids and the stuff that is inhaled, as well as the mouthpiece. So this is the thing that's in contact with the mouth. So each pod has about roughly 200 puffs, give or take, and hits about 40 milligrams of nicotine. So that's a lot of nicotine, and that's something that we're going to showcase a little bit later in the presentation. But these are the two main components of a pod-based system. And in reality, it's kind of the anatomy of most of these e-cigarette and vape products. So click again, please. They're usually covered with these really, really bright colored caps, so you can't see the e-liquids themselves, but they all contain a lot of toxic chemicals and most notably nicotine. Click again. One more. Awesome. So just a quick poll here. You can use your unmute yourself, or you can use the chat box. How many of these devices have you seen? These are kind of the different variations of products that we've seen out in the open. And the reason why we're showcasing them here is because we wanted to kind of show you the evolution and different types of e-cigarette and vaping devices that are being used right now. So it kind of started traditionally on the first top left is the e-cigarettes that look more like the combustible cigarettes that we're all used to and used to seeing. And it evolved into the vape pens and the mods, which introduces the ability to refill your own e-liquid juices, as well as adjust the temperatures that you see here in the mods. And then we get to the 5th generation stuff, which is the one right under the mods, the disposable pens that have the same kind of anatomy. It's the battery as well as the pods that hold e-cigarettes and the mouthpiece. These are the most prevalent ones right now that we see out in the open. So it came from e-cigarettes to vape pens to mods to disposable pod-based stuff. So here are some other products that we've seen out in the open. Next slide, please. These are relatively new. We're still trying to get as much information as we can with these products, but we know they're out there because these have been submitted through our resources as well as through the youth. So there's caffeine pens, there's melatonin pens, and there's vitamin pens. Now, I'm not an expert, disclaimer here, I'm not a doctor or anything, but from my understanding, these chemicals are not meant to be inhaled through your lungs. These are relatively heavy chemicals and molecules. So just by first glance, these look like they may not be as helpful as they claim to be. So yeah, caffeine pens, melatonin pens, and vitamin pens. Next slide, please. So like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of nicotine in these products. This is from the Stanford Tobacco Toolkit. This is one of our favorite images to show how much nicotine is actually in these products. So you see the traditional pack of cigarettes has roughly about 20 milligrams of nicotine. That's about 1 milligram of nicotine per stick. If you look at the Juul pods here, that's about twice as much. There's about 41.3 milligrams of nicotine per pod. That's about 2 boxes of cigarettes per pod. Click, please. There it is. The puff bars, add 10 more cigarettes to that and you have a puff bar. So that's about a box and 10 more cigarettes for you if you don't have enough nicotine. And then lastly, the most alarming amount is the Soren pods, which have a whopping 90 milligrams of nicotine. That's about almost, what, 4 boxes of cigarettes in one pod. So you can see there's a lot of misconstrued and like misconceptions that, oh, 1 pod is about 1 cigarette, when in actuality you're about to hit about 1 box or 2 boxes of cigarette boxes in 1 pod. So some people go through this in 1 day. That's 2 boxes per day, an equivalent to nicotine. So next slide, please. Yes, a lot of nicotine. How does this affect the brain, especially one that's developing? This is what we see in the youth. Click, please. So what happens is, as your brain is developing, it's creating connections and synapses. That's how it creates memories and creates retention of memory. And when nicotine is introduced to this brain, or into the brain, it creates a response from the brain to release pleasure senses. Now, what that does is it creates this illusion that in order to create this pleasure sense, that you have to have nicotine. And otherwise, the other ways we get these connections through pleasures, through eating, having healthy relationships, doing activities that we like. At a young age, if you introduce nicotine, that kind of rewires everything. And instead of creating those connections for those healthy activities, you get it through nicotine. And the reason why that's such a strong connection is because that's one of our survival techniques. You need to eat, you need to be active, you need to build relationships. And so that's kind of essentially how addiction starts. And then that's big tobacco and big vape knows that once you get the youth at a young age, you create those connections, it becomes a biological effect, a biological dependency. And they have a customer for life. So the youth is a really big target for these folks because they know it's a sure profit margin in the future. So next slide, please. More so, if the brain wasn't bad enough, it also affects the lungs. Surprise, surprise. Click. And so what happens is these e-liquids get heated up and they create really, really small molecules and they go into the lungs and they just wreak havoc in there. It damages the respiratory airwaves. It creates an immune response from your body, inflammation, mucus in the airwaves that makes it really difficult to breathe. It goes into the little sacs into your lungs. They're called alveoli, and those are really, really delicate tissue membranes. And it just pops it like a balloon, creates little holes, and it weakens your ability to breathe, to take in oxygen, and to disperse it throughout the body. And what's more alarming is it actually damages your immune response because your lungs are so damaged already that your body's constantly throwing out antibodies and immune responses to the lungs that it gets kind of tired. And therefore you get a weaker immune response to most things that your body should be able to fight. Now this kind of relates to something that's been happening in the past couple of years, and that's COVID-19 pandemic. So let's see a quick video here to showcase how vaping and these products affect those who have COVID-19. So next slide, please. I'm gonna do a quick video here.
All right, maybe a little bit loud, so just giving you guys a little disclaimer, so you may want to lower down your volume just in case. All right, starting video right now.
Dear Dr. Rutland, I read that vaping can protect you from COVID-19. Is that true? Maybe in an alternate universe, but in this one, the risk of dying from COVID-19 could increase if you vape or smoke.
Awesome. Short and straight to the point. As you guessed it, it's not It's not good for your chances with COVID-19 if you are vaping or constantly vaping. So next slide. We talked about kind of how that affects the body. Let's look at how the vaping companies and the big tobacco products target the youth. Here's an example of an advertisement from a vaping company. If you notice, there's a certain age demographic that this model is in. Her certain style is depicting a certain population. She's holding it in a very attractive way and something that's really, really cool. You don't see her smoking or having a hard time with anything. She's having fun. And that's kind of the image that these vaping companies are trying to portray. It's trying to attract the youth into thinking, this is a cool thing. This is what you should be doing. You shouldn't be going out and playing or reading books or talking to somebody. You should be vaping. Now, it's alarming to think that they're still allowed to do this. They don't openly say they do, but surprisingly, we found examples within the past year that they still do this. Next slide. And here's an example of that. I'm going to read it out loud, or we can read it together. Solo break. We know that the inside vibes have been quite a challenge. Stay sane with Puff Bar this solo break. We know you'll love it. It's a perfect escape from the back-to-back Zoom calls, parental texts, and work from home stress. Now, I don't know about you, but parental texts and Zoom calls seems pretty targeted to a specific population. I still text my parents, but not. I would be surprised if that wasn't targeted to the youth. And we all know Zoom calls is the prominent device and medium used right now with schools to connect to their students. So even though it's not blatantly obvious, I think it's definitely targeted to a certain population here. Next slide. So let's look at the data.
Go direction. Oh, Philo.
Juan, you're on mute.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So this is what the data shows. This is from the California Student Tobacco Survey. This is tobacco use among high school students in Santa Clara County. Now, I don't want you to worry about any of the numbers except for the smaller ones right now. Now, notice that this is the smokeless hookah, big cigars, little cigars, and cigarettes. Numbers are really, really low compared to the other two big ones. The one to the left of that is e-cigarettes, and the overall is essentially all those numbers combined into one. Now, what this shows is the overall is at 33.1 and the e-cigarettes 31.6, meaning that the e-cigarettes is carrying that number throughout the whole entire Santa Clara County. So e-cigarettes is the biggest tobacco use among the youth today, is what this number is showing, according to this survey. So next slide, please. And the reasons why the youth are using it is because of the picture to the left. So just a quick hand, or you can unmute or you can use the chat. How many of those products do you think are candy and how many of them are actually vape devices? Give you guys a second there. Now, I don't know about you, but I had a hard time figuring out which one is a vape product and which one was candy. Have candy, yeah, who knows? And this is the reason why the youth are attracted to this, because it's something that they think is really inviting, really innocent. The street products mask the harshness of nicotine and the other toxic chemicals that are in there. They see their peers using it. They see family members using it. The retail accessibility, which we'll talk about a little bit after this, targeting like the mental health and stress of growing up, school, the misperception, as well as chastising and punishing certain communities, namely the LGBT community and the African American community, knowing that they're the most susceptible to these types of influences and these advertisements. So it's all very targeted. They're very smart with their strategy on how they attract certain communities and populations, namely that of the youth. So next slide, please. So there's more research which I wanted to find out where the youth are getting these devices. And our first thought was, oh, they're getting it through the internet. They're going through their own ways through the internet and getting these products. But what we actually found was 54.6%, so about more than half of high school students report that they got their e-cigarettes and the vaping devices from social sources. I mean, they got it from their friends, they got it from family members, someone they know. So they're not actually going online. And the second biggest way they got this is purchasing it themselves. So this was very alarming. We found that they were getting it from our own stores. There are store owners that are violating these protocols, these regulations that we put in place, that it doesn't get into the hands of those who will be most susceptible to these products. So those are the numbers. That's the vaping portion. Gonna pass it down, hand it down to my colleague AJ, who's gonna talk a bit more about cannabis.
All right, thank you, Juan. Before we switch up a little bit, are there any questions as on the vape section? Feel free to unmute or use the chat box before we switch to the marijuana and cannabis section. Think we're okay? All right, yeah, feel free to save your questions until the end also. All right, so as you can see here, marijuana or cannabis has many different forms and also has many different names, all right? So there's, the names can be marijuana or cannabis, Mary Jane, ganja, weed. There are over 1,200 slang terms, I believe. And with cannabis, there are kind of two different extreme camps. So one side believes that cannabis is horrible and really serves like no human value. And the other side kind of argues that it's the best drug that you could use. It can solve every health problem, all right? So in this presentation, we do want to talk about it in a non-judgmental way and a fact-based way. So we will, in this presentation, we will be referring it to we will be referring this to as cannabis. So what you see here are many different forms of cannabis. As you can see, it can look very different depending on the form that it comes in. So there's the joint, the blunt, and spliff. You can see there, edibles, which are super popular, CBD oils, tinctures, and CBD capsules, bongs or pipes, wax pens, and dabs. So these forms fall into two categories, and is eaten and inhaled. And when it is eaten, it is entered through the body through the digestive system. And when it is inhaled, it is breathed in and enters through the lungs. All right, so going into the science. So there are two chemicals in cannabis that are responsible for causing direct effects on the body and are most talked about when cannabis is mentioned. So one is responsible for the high or the buzz, which makes someone feel high, and it's the psychoactive property. And one is responsible for solving medical problems such as epileptic seizures, anxiety, inflammation, and inability to sleep. So THC, which is also known as tetrahydrocannabinol, is what gives cannabis its psychoactive property and makes the user feel high. And CBD is also known as is cannabidiol, and is a non-psychoactive property and can be used for clinical or medical purposes when under the supervision of a medical professional. All right, so from the graph here, you can see that THC, the psychoactive component in cannabis, is rising very significantly. Cannabis today is highly manufactured in a way that there is more THC present in the cannabis that is being sold today. So the cannabis today is not the same as it was way back in the day, as you can tell from the graph and with the various forms that it comes in. With THC as a component that is highly addictive and makes the user feel high, THC levels have skyrocketed through the roof, which can lead to high levels of addiction in youth and also for cannabis intoxication also. So when THC is introduced to the body, it mimics a chemical in the brain that we naturally create, and that chemical is called anandamide. So anandamide plays a role in the brain, in the areas that influence pleasure, memory, thinking, concentration, movement, coordination, sensory, and time perception. So when someone is continuously using cannabis and introducing THC into the brain, your brain starts to think that it does not need to create the natural chemical that it creates, which is also called anandamide. So when your brain is thinking that it doesn't need to create that anymore, it starts to create low levels in the body, which also means that your body is craving that natural chemical. So what happens when you're craving that? The user wants to start using THC more and more, which is also creating addiction into the body. All right, so not just going into the short-term effects, it has many short-term effects on the human body, as you can see here. Some of the obvious physical changes include red eyes, dry mouth, impaired motor function, increased appetite, delayed response, muscle relaxation, and increased heart rate. And not for someone experiencing the high, or intoxication of cannabis, they may feel some of the following: so skin sensation, memory loss, paranoia, pleasure or bliss, or altered perception. And these are the effects of THC and CBD acting on the body. All right, so now going, as you can see here, just from the CSTS, the California Student Tobacco Survey, of those students who use marijuana, nearly 1 in 3 high school students, so 31%, smoked cannabis mixed with tobacco, so such as a blunt or a pipe. So just going back to the forms of cannabis, smoking a blunt, which is also with the Swisher Sweet here. It comes in a variety of different flavors, fruity flavors. They have like a diamond flavor, and candy flavors also. They are wrapping the cannabis into the tobacco, and they're getting exposed to the chemicals of the tobacco and exposed to the risk of cannabis also. So at the end of the day, smoke is smoke, and it is extremely toxic to the lungs in any form that it comes in. All right, so now going back to going back to some more data, the CSTS. This is asking among Santa Clara High School students who has ever used cannabis. 21% have smoked it, 15% has ate it, 13.7% has vaped it, 6.5% has dabbed it, and then just going back to they have drank it, and then they have used it in another way also. So just with all the various forms youth are being introduced to, most of them are smoking it, but we do want to highlight that vaping cannabis is very popular also. All right, so now going to the reasons why Santa Clara County High School students have reported using cannabis. 41% have said that they have used it to relax. 19% is to have a good time with friends. 18% to get high. 9% just because, and 8% for medical or health reason. I do want to highlight the highest percentage there is to relax. I think being a high school student or just being a student in general, or being younger, there are a lot of stressful times, and youth are using these products to maybe cope with stress or cope with maybe identity issues or anything that they go through as teens. So now I just want to go to the next slide and just really go into positive coping mechanisms. So some teens will vape or use cannabis to get high and feel a pleasure instead of stress or anxiety. So this can feel like a relief or even a break just from reality. So for cannabis, it can train the brain to kind of depend on it to feel better in any stressful situations. And this is how cannabis can easily become the go-to for coping mechanisms for people. So a coping mechanism is a tool that someone uses to deal with a tough situation. So relying on cannabis or nicotine as their go-to coping mechanism will keep someone from learning the skills that they need to really deal with the stress in their life. So instead of learning other skills like talking to a friend about a problem, exercising to blow off steam, or developing an artistic outlet, they might easily rely on cannabis or tobacco because they might feel like it works for them. But that is really a short-term outlet. The problem is that it may work to reduce or mask the discomfort and pain, but when it comes down from being high, nothing has changed. Their situations are the same, and they have learned no new skills to deal with their challenges. To make matters worse, someone who uses cannabis as a go-to to coping mechanism may eventually cut out activities that might actually make them happy. So as a parent or a guardian, you can have a conversation with your teen or child about how to deal with stress or anxiety and how to cope in a really healthy way. So feel free to sound off in the chat box. What are some healthy coping mechanisms you can brainstorm with your teen or child? And we do want you all to remember that healthy coping mechanisms should be interesting to the young person also. So feel free to put in the chat box or unmute yourself. What are some healthy coping mechanisms that you can brainstorm with your child? Writing in journals. I definitely started writing more, being at home and social distancing really helps me articulate my thoughts. Exercise, yes, super helpful. I never regret a workout. All right, so feel free to add any positive coping mechanisms in the chat box. I'm pretty sure everyone here can benefit from anyone's ideas as it comes to positive coping mechanisms. All right, so we do have a question. So since it is easy to hide, how do we know they use small behavior or whatever a parent can know? So that's a perfect question because I'm going to pass it over to Lindsay, who's actually going to be talking about that in this next section, all right? So thank you for that question.
That was the perfect time for that question to pop up. So just some signs of vaping, the equipment. So we showed you guys a bunch of different devices throughout this presentation. And the variety of these devices and the resemblance that they have to like harmless items such as flash drives makes it easy for the youth to hide. As you guys saw in that picture with all the different candy and stuff, a lot of the things looked similar due to the shapes and sizes and all the colors. Online or store purchases are made harder. Our store purchases are a little harder, so a lot of youth have found loopholes online. It's really hard to control, their age and what they're entering through online sources. Candy and fruity scents, a lot of these devices have this sweet smell to them when they're used. So when you smell that sweet smell, that could be a sign that your youth is vaping. Increased thirst, nosebleeds, and interest in stronger flavors. The e-liquids in these devices contain chemicals that can dry out the mouth and the nasal passages, which can result in increased thirst and more nosebleeds. Decreased caffeine use can affect the vaping due to increased caffeine sensitivity if the youth vapes. Vaping slang, which is just words like that youth are using to describe these devices, kind of as a way to hide, what they're actually talking about from their parents, from teachers, from people around them. Social media and online influences. I know a lot of youth are into TikTok right now, and maybe say their favorite TikToker is using a vaping device. They're going to want to try it. They're going to become curious. And behavioral changes. They can become irritable due to nicotine withdrawal, as well as experience some physical symptoms. Next slide, please. So nicotine and marijuana withdrawal are not really dangerous. It's just going to be really uncomfortable for the individual. Some things that they can feel are feeling irritable, restless, and jittery, having headaches, increased sweating, feeling sad or down, feeling anxious, feeling tired or groggy, having trouble concentrating or thinking clearly, having trouble falling asleep, feeling hungry, and having intense cravings for e-cigarettes. So firsthand, I have witnessed this. My little brother, he just graduated high school, and he kind of fell into, following his peers and started vaping and stuff like that. And you can really tell with him when he hasn't had like a puff of his vape bar or whatever he's using in that device. He becomes really irritable. He doesn't really want to hang out with us. He's really withdrawal. So it's sad to see someone's personality changing, and it's something you will notice if your child is using this device. So go ahead and go on to the next slide. 5 tips for handling some withdrawal symptoms. You guys had mentioned exercise. That's a really good way for the youth to get out and get moving and kind of distract themselves. Use distractions, and the 1 to 2 minutes of cravings will pass. Set up an environment for success. Temptation-free homes are great, and your youth should let their friends know, like, hey, I'm not trying to use right now, so that they can have a support system if they're trying to quit using these devices. Find stress solutions. So examine your coping skills, deep breathing, drinking water, talking to a friend friend or family member that they can trust, and celebrate your accomplishments. It can be as simple as like making a little countdown of how many days the youth has stopped using these devices. I know that's what they do in AA. They say like 1, 2, 3 days sober. And it's really motivating to see that number just go up and go up. So that's a really good technique to use with the youth as well. And as a parent, I know you guys are probably going through many different struggles with your teens. I'm not a parent myself, so I don't know what you guys experience on the day-to-day basis, but some things that you guys can try to practice when wanting to protect your teen against vaping is being equipped with the facts and staying informed and having a conversation with them. The goal is to have a conversation and not a lecture, because if you're sitting there lecturing them, they're probably not going to be opening up to you as much as you want them to. And finding the right time really matters. Like, not bringing up, hey, are you vaping, when their friends are all around. Of course, they're going to get like a shelter and wall built up. So just having a private area where they feel comfortable to open up to you and have a conversation. Be patient and ready to listen, and avoid criticism. Avoid also accusing them right away, like, you don't vape, right? Maybe start talking about vaping and what their thoughts and concerns about it are, and kind of just let the conversation flow. And try to understand why they're vaping. They might be feeling pressures at school from their peers. They might be experiencing a lot of stress, and they think that this is a way that they can cope. Convey your expectations, role play with them refusal skills, because it is very difficult as a teen to probably refuse things that everyone around them is doing, and work with them to come up with ways that they can refuse them, and let them know that their peers aren't going to just not stop hanging out with them because they're choosing not to use this device. And be a good example. If you're telling them not to use these products, and if they see you using them, it's going to be really hard for them to understand why they can't use them. They're just going to think like, hey, my mom or dad or grandpa uses it and I can too. Discuss positive coping strategies. Some things can be like journaling, like you guys said, exercising, cooking. It just has to be something they're interested in and willing to do. Next slide, please. So what to do if your child is vaping? Take a health approach. Keep the lines of communication open, like I discussed in the last slide. Let them know that you're there for them and that you're concerned about their health and safety, and that they will want to come talk to you if you keep it open and let them express how they're feeling. Go easy on yourself. It's hard to be a parent. There's many struggles you guys are battling. Just go easy on yourself and get help if you need it. Address underlying mental or emotional challenges. Right now, especially, a lot of teens are going through things that, they probably would have never thought they had to go through. They're missing their high school and middle school experience, all the dances, all the sports that they're, it's all starting to slowly get back, but that has to have taken a mental toll on them. So just kind of addressing those things. And if you need to, go get help from a primary care doctor. Next slide, please. So here's some resources. I'll go ahead and enter them into the chat box. These are just some resources that you guys can use if you think that your teen may be using. These are some helplines for them. And then here is also all of our emails on this slide. And if you guys need to email us for any more information, feel free to. But now the floor is your guys's, and we are open to any questions that you guys may have. Yes, AJ, thank you. Feel free to take a photo of this slide. It might be a little easier.
I'll leave the slide up maybe for 15 seconds before we head to the Q&A session.
If you guys have any questions, you can either unmute yourself or go ahead and put them in the chat box, and we'll do our best at answering them.
I'm assuming they're typing away, so we're giving them a little bit more time. Someone's in meeting.
While we're waiting for questions, Andrew, I don't know if you want to talk about, just let parents know some stuff that we've seen on campus. I know you put in the chat about the most common device we see on campus, but just kind of, the problems that we've had here at Piedmont Hills.
Of course. The group here presented information about a number of different drugs, and there were a couple in there that I don't know about yet, like the vitamin bars. It's going to be interesting to see when those show up. Yeah, the thing that we see most common on campus is are the jewel bars that we see, the puff bars. That they're tiny. I highly encourage you to go out and just do a Google search and look at jewel bar, and they look like, honestly, they look like those little cases for lead for mechanical pencils. That's like the exact size, it's the exact shape. They're tiny. I know that we sometimes suspect that a kid will have it, and I've seen them tucked in their backpacks, and sometimes it's really hard to find them in their backpacks. I've seen a kid tuck it in their shoe and like walk away just fine without, it's so small that it can fit just about anywhere. So yeah, have the conversations if you suspect that something's happening with your student in terms of the vape bars. They're really, really small and fairly easily to be hidden. So just be aware that it's not something that you're just going to find very, very easily if a student is trying to hide them really well. We do get some marijuana on campus. To be honest, we tend to know who those students are fairly quickly. I can tell you that they exchange hands, both the marijuana and the vape bars. They change hands on campus, off campus, like, again, very, very easily. It's surprising to me how inexpensive they are. So a kid who's got $5–10, they can get something. So it's not that issue either. Now, that said, if you find that your student suddenly has a bunch of 5s and a bunch of 10s, or seems to have more money than they probably should be, then maybe they're doing more than just potentially even using. They may even be the person who's supplying on campus. So if you find that as a concern, talk to your students and maybe even bring it up to us, and we can try to talk with them as well. It's really hard if a student really wants to hide stuff for us on campus to see it, because there are just almost anywhere they can go. Again, they're so small. The only way that we find it is when we catch somebody in the act, and that's awkward too, because it tends to be in our bathrooms, and we don't really want an adult standing in our restrooms. So that's the report that we get pretty often. We do go in to like do a quick head check, like, hey, something happened in here, but that's about it. Yeah, and always open to discussion and questions. If you don't want to search your kid's backpack, maybe you let us know that there's a potential, and we can use that as a way to search. But then we're going to call you and tell you that we're searching backpacks.
There's a couple questions now, if you guys want to take them.
Sure. So Amy asked, compared to other counties in the Bay Area, is the percentage of students using tobacco higher or lower? Excellent question. Right now, there are certain counties in the Bay Area. There's no research that backs up all the counties within the state, specifically even those in the Bay Area, because certain counties either opt out or cannot be included in these research studies. But what we do know is that the percentage usage here in Santa Clara County is actually quite low compared to the state average of tobacco use among the youth. And there's good news. I think there was research that came out last year that's still being kind of peer reviewed, but vape usage has actually gone down within the last year. That reasoning, can be varied, just like Ginny mentioned, because youth aren't in school, they don't have that peer-to-peer influence, or they're not out there trying to get it out in stores because stores are closed. That could contribute to that. But for the most part, the percentage is going down from what we see, and we don't anticipate it going up. Obviously, things could happen, but that's good news there. And then Gina has a question. Since these latest drugs and nicotine items are more potent, should their personal physician be consulted for dealing with withdrawal symptoms? Absolutely. The withdrawal is a process. It's not something that you can turn on and off. It's not a light switch. Everyone goes through their own process. So having a physician present and having their opinion, professional opinion, will only be beneficial, I think. AJ, Lindsay, you guys want to add anything with any of the questions?
I think you did a really good job answering them. Like Juan said too, like if you, for health reasons, if you ever have any concerns, you should consult with the physicians just to get their medical advice. Like we're not doctors, we can kind of sway you guys some advice, but they're gonna know best.
And I want to point out too, I believe as of January of last year, all flavored tobacco was banned in the state. So, I mean, theoretically, it should be harder to get these vape pens and things like that, but the kids are buying them illegal anyway because you have to be 20. Is it 21 now too? Yeah, and you have to be 21 to buy tobacco. So.
Is there any other questions? Ready? If you guys don't have any more questions, you feel free. Oh, some came in. Amy asked, what's the price range for vaping devices, the price trend? They range kind of depending on the devices that you want. The disposable ones, I think, are probably up. It depends on the size too, because they have just the regular size puff bars, for instance. They have the regular size, and then they have the mega ones, which are really big. So they probably range from 15 to 35, I would say. But that's for the disposable ones. The jewel pods, again, depends on the packs that you want to buy if you already have the device. Because with the jewel, you need to have the bar plus the disposable pods. So the bar itself, I think, is probably around like $50. And then the pods, again, come in either you can buy one for, I think, ranging again $25 to you can buy a whole pack of them for hundreds of dollars. So it just kind of depends, but they're all in that price range. So another question, since this is a serious issue with teenagers, will schools have any program classes to educate the teens in schools? We talk about educating class, not option classes. So that's actually what we do. We are the tobacco use prevention education team. So we go to different schools and present. So this presentation is tailored towards you, the parent population. We also have youth presentations that we give. And we also have multiple different groups within schools where a teacher is kind of in charge of the group, and they're called peer advocates, and they kind of educate the peer advocates and raise advocacy on campus about vaping and try to get the word out there, because we've found that peer-to-peer, it helps if their peers are talking about these devices because they can relate to them a little bit more. Is there a legal age to use those devices? So you have to be 21 to buy them, but we can't control who decides to use them, or the state can't control who decides to use them. So 21 to purchase them.
These are all great questions. Keep them coming in.
Any other final thoughts or questions for us before we wrap it up?
I want to say one more thing for the students that when we find them on campus with any kind of contraband of this nature, we always try to take it as like a medical issue. We're going to call families. We're going to treat the kids like they're potentially doing something that's harming themselves, and really kind of focus more on that rather than really taking it as a discipline issue. Obviously, we have safety things that we need to figure out, but what we tend to do is think about the safety of the student, the one who's participating in it first, making sure that they're safe, making sure that they get back with their families. And that's the focus for us. So if we see a student who continues to do things like this, then we really want to push for that like kind of medical side of like, how are we going to help the student get past the decision to make this kind of choice.
Okay, well, I want to thank you guys for coming today and doing this presentation. It's always good to, and we listen to this presentation every year, and we have you guys come out, but there's always like new things. Andrew and I were texting each other, like, I did not know what dabbing was and that was the origin of the dance move. And I actually texted my 18-year-old daughter and I'm like, why didn't you tell me this? Like, what? I totally learned something today. So that was awesome. So thank you for that. I let my husband know too, and now he's learned something new too. So that was good for all of us. One last question. At home, parents try our best to control the situation. What school staff should do to help the parent feel safe during school? I think, contact us at the school if you need help and support with this. As a school, we are definitely here to help support you if you think there's a problem. Mr. Campbell and the advisors, that's what their job is. And so we absolutely, if this is something you're concerned about and you want us to support you, we absolutely can, and we can connect you with resources like the lovely people that presented here today to help support you also.
Our school social worker has some background in this as well. We often make referrals over to her so she can work with kids.
Yeah. So if we see people, there was a question about, seeing a group of people usually hanging around after school, vaping. Curious if you're seeing that now, because there's really not been anybody on campus. But let us know, and if you see, certainly if you see something that is kind of a constant, that's always good for us to know about. And before the pandemic, okay, that makes more sense, because I was like, really? There's nobody here. Yeah, definitely. And so, there's, so you can contact me, you can contact Mr. Campbell. We're the ones. So, okay. So thank you guys. Like I said, we try to actually do this presentation to the parents every year. So we'll do it again next year. So when there's new information, we all keep up to date with it. Okay. All right. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.